Sorry about the quality for this video. I'm just heading out the door, and I'm in a bit of a hurry, so I thought I'd direct upload this. But anyway, it's just a sort of a response to a comment from Andreas, Mr. Moss from Norway, um, who mentioned the point that comes up a lot when dealing with the depressive realism phenomenon, the idea that people who are not depressives or who are non-DRs or whatever, who are optimists, I guess, which is a kind of a label I don't like to have applied to myself, but, well, people are going to apply it to me. What can I do? Um, they say that people who are not DRs, depressive realists, are deluding themselves. Oh, really? Well, again, that's my my original point that, okay, assuming that there is such a thing as delusion in terms of value, um, how do we know that we're seeing things correctly enough to determine whether or not somebody else is deluding themselves? I can say that someone who says that suffering has uh, absolute negative value is deluding themselves, but how do I know? How can I make that case? I'm not quite sure that I can. I don't think that that case can be made. By the same token, someone can say that my view of suffering, i.e., suffering, it's the old whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger sort of platitude, I guess. Although I don't find it, in my experience, all that much of a platitude. They can say that, well, that's rubbish too. That's just a delusion. Okay, then I'm just looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. All right, so we're both accusing each other essentially of being deluded, and as far as I can tell, we don't have any fixed points by which to determine whether or not either of us is seeing things the way it really is, the way things really are. All that we're doing is calling each other names, really. You're deluded. Okay, now what? Well, either one of us is deluded, both of us is deluded, or neither of us are deluded. Um, now what? Again, what are you going to do with that kind of a dynamic? Um, you go back to the old, well, is certainty possible? Is there any way to tell whether or not somebody is deluded? Okay, I understand that certain things you can say are generally what we would agree to be a delusion. In other words, if I don't know, assume that when I drop an eyedropper of fluid into my eyes, if I assume it's going to fly up to the ceiling instead of down into my eye, I think that that's reasonably classifiable as a delusion, because I have no evidence that that's going to happen, and tons of evidence that you know, the contrary is going to happen, that it's going to plop down into my eye, because that's the way it always has, and every other way I test that kind of thing, gravity, it works that way. But value? Oh, wait a minute. No, 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 no. That's nowhere near as simple. I've said in the past, okay, I went through a period of what's called white depression that was so severe that, okay, well, you can't walk. It's hard to get out of bed, that kind of thing. I don't feel that way anymore. I haven't felt that way in a very long time. Or at least not to that extent. You know, you have your bad days. Now, the fact that I had this in a bizarre sort of way, and I've discussed this with others who have been through not really something similar, but people who have emerged from bad periods in their lives. It's sort of a bizarre um, sort of paradox that it seems to have improved my life. Now that I have this in my past, as sort of a touchstone of the bad things in life, I can sort of say, okay, I made it through that, and that seems to have strengthened me and improved my resistance to the lousy things in life. But I can only go by my own experience, and I can only go by my own experience up to this point. At the end of the day, I don't know. It may have been destroying me at the time, and I'm just sort of coming up for air before I plunge back down into it. How do I know? It could happen. It might not happen. I don't know. But from where I'm standing at this point in time, from this perspective, it does seem to have actually strengthened me and inoculated me against a recurrence of at least the same sorts of things. When you inoculate somebody against a disease, you give them a very mild dose of it so that their body builds up antibodies, and suddenly they're far more resistant to the disease. So I can say that, to the best of my knowledge, suffering has strengthened me. Severe suffering. Now, I can only judge the severity of that suffering by my own experience, and I can only say that it was the worst thing that I can possibly imagine, which means that it might not be anywhere near as severe as anyone else's suffering, but we don't have any way to compare a suffering. There's no absolute measure of this sort of thing, and there's no sufferometer out there. So, am I deluding myself? Well, you're going to have to tell me what a delusion is. Because I can say that the guy who sits there well-fed behind his computer in a house where he'll never have to worry about freezing, starving, all that other sort of thing, is deluding himself by telling himself that the world is a hellish place, etc. I can say that, but I don't have any way of knowing whether or not he or she, I guess, is deluding him or herself. I admit that. They may be right. From their perspective, this world might be horrible. I have no way of knowing. The only case that I'm making is I'm defending myself against the charge that I may or that I may be deluded. Like I said, if I'm deluded, then the state of non-delusion must exist in order to call me deluded. How do you tell somebody that on the base level of value they are deluded?